Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much, Jerry. Thank you for those kind words. I'm sorry you had to mention that I ran for President of the United States. Mentioned earlier to the students, after I lost, I slept like a baby. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. And I'd like to ask your sympathy, besides give Arizona back its water that you stole, I'd like to ask your sympathy for the families of the state of Arizona, because Barry Goldwater from Arizona ran for President of the United States. A guy named Morris Udall from Arizona ran for President of the United States. A guy named Bruce Babbitt from Arizona ran for President of the United States. I from Arizona ran for President of the United States. Arizona may be the only state in America where mothers don't tell their children that someday they can grow up and be President of the United States. So I ask your sympathy. I also want to thank you for your warm welcome. That's not always the case in America. In case you missed it, the approval rating of Congress is now 12%. Did you see that yet? I've not met anyone in the 12% bracket lately. In fact, we are down to paid staff and blood relatives. My mother, a University of Southern California graduate, who is 102, there you go. As is my wife, Theta. So I recall the Theta sorority was where all the nuclear physicists hung out. But anyway, she is 102 years old, my mother is, and she called me the other day. And I am sorry to tell you, we're now down to paid staff. Again, it's the approval rating is down. I came through Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport the other weekend. I was going home, and a guy ran up to me and said, he said, anybody ever tell you look a lot like Senator John McCain? I said, yeah. He said, well, doesn't it sometimes just make you mad as hell? So I want to thank you for your warm welcome tonight. Vladimir Putin, after the Arab Spring began, I tweeted one day, sent out a tweet that said, Dear Vlad, the Arab Spring is coming to a neighborhood near you. And I thought that was pretty clever, a tweet, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you I got thousands of tweets back in Russian. So I asked a guy from the, not being real good at Russian, I asked this guy from the Library of Congress, Russian guy, speaker, translator, to come over. And to this day, I remember some of the graphic descriptions in those tweets as to how I was going to die. Questions about my social habits. It was a remarkable response. And so Vlad and I have always been pretty close in our relationship. And as Jerry mentioned, I'm now going to not be able to go to Russia for spring break. And as he mentioned, I'm now going to have to move those illegal campaign contributions to a Swiss bank from Moscow, but I might not be able to. First of all, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your engagement and interest. I want to especially thank our young students who I received a real interrogation from today in my conversations with them. And these are very difficult times in the world. And first of all, I want to give you some good news. The United States of America's best days are still ahead of us. And there's some things that have been happening lately that are very good news for the United States of America. One of them is energy. We are now an energy exporter. And if we'd been in this conversation 10 years ago, I'm sure you wouldn't have thought that was possible. And it's going to have some dramatic effects on our trade deficit, on the fact that We must, not can, but must over time arrange supplies of energy to our European friends and allies so that they can become energy independent of Russia, which they are now dependent. It will have a huge, and I think, and also, my friends, we care about the Middle East, and we care deeply about the Middle East, but we might not care quite as much if we're not dependent upon the Middle East for our oil sources. So that's the good news. Manufacturing technology has made dramatic impact. We are now increasing our manufacturing in the United States of America, where jobs and manufacturing are coming back to the United States of America. We still are the most innovative nation on earth. And all of the new things, all of the advances, literally, without exception, come from Silicon Valley or Boston or the other areas where there is so much innovation and technology and bright young people. It still is the country that gives the best education. Do you know that there's 25,000 Chinese students taking advanced degrees in the United States of America today? And by the way, we need immigration reform so that if some of those students, the majority of what we call STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math postgraduate students today are not, the majority are not American. They're from foreign countries all over the world. And if we'll enact comprehensive immigration reform, we will be able to, if they choose, keep those students in this country. Right now, they have to go back to the country that they came from. So there's good news in America's future. Our deficit is declining. There is job creation, although it's very static and stagnant. We are barely coming out of the longest recession since the Great Depression, but we are coming out. So I can give you, in the long term, some good news. I can give you some bad news about Russia. My friends, Russia today is a gas station masquerading as a country. That's all it is. If the price of a barrel of oil goes down below $80 a barrel, I can assure you that Russian economy will be on the ropes. They have an aging population. They have an alcohol problem. They have an AIDS problem. They have a huge problem with their population who knows what kind of government they have. A kleptocracy, oligarchs that run the whole country, pals of Vladimir Putin. So the long-term aspect, I think, of the world is probably pretty good. Now, we have a lot of other challenges, like the rise of China, which will be the great challenge of the 21st century. But right now, my friends, I'm very, very, very worried in the short term about America's role in the world. Now, I am a proud Republican. I have a good relationship with the President of the United States. I talked to him yesterday. It's my job to get along with the President of the United States wherever I can and work with him, particularly on national security. So there's no animosity between me and the President of the United States. I got over that a long, long time ago. And I did the best that I could, and I'm proud of my friends and my campaign, but you move on in life. And I've spent most of my life, since I was 17, serving this country. And so what I'm about to... Sometimes not very well. I managed to intercept a surface-to-air missile with my own airplane, which was no mean feat. But so I'm very worried because of the United States appears to our friends and our adversaries around the world as us having withdrawn. Now, we went through a period of time when George W. Bush was president where we got into 2 wars. Now, whether we should have gotten into those wars or not and how we got out, we could spend the evening talking about it. But Americans are war weary. Americans don't want us to be engaged in the world. And Barack Obama, when he came to be the presidency in 2009, basically that was his mission. He's not Bush, and he wanted us out. The only thing that I think Barack Obama did not understand, and to this day does not understand, is that the United States of America is the indispensable nation. The United States of America must lead. If we don't, who will? And the United States of America is still, despite in some parts of the world where we're unpopular, still a beacon of hope to people throughout the world. I can tell you, in the square in Maidan, when I talked to 300,000 people in sub-freezing weather, they said, "Thank you, USA. Thank you, USA." So, but having said that, the President of the United States, in my view, does not understand that if America doesn't lead, there is going to be other countries who fill that vacuum. And if you look at the globe today, and you look at the world in January of 2009, you will see it has shifted dramatically wherever you look, even in our own hemisphere. But I want to talk to you a bit tonight about two places, and one of them is Ukraine and the other is Syria. In Ukraine, I would remind you, and I don't mean to insult your intelligence, Russia began in Ukraine, in Kiev, and they moved many centuries ago to St. Petersburg and then to Moscow. Vladimir Putin believes that Ukraine is part of the Russian Empire. Vladimir Putin is an old KGB colonel that believes that Russia was meant to dominate that part of the world. And that means the near abroad. That means the Baltics, that means Moldova, that means Ukraine. And Ukraine is the crown jewel. Ukraine has 38 million people. And Ukraine, with Henry Kissinger said, Russia with Ukraine is an empire, Russia without Ukraine is a country. And I think Henry Kissinger was right. So what happened? In 2004, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had the Orange Revolution, and everybody was excited, and unfortunately, the people that came to power betrayed the people of Ukraine with corruption, with divisions, with all kinds of problems. And then we got Yanukovych and, of course, the corruption that's there. I mean, I hope you've seen the pictures of the house, or excuse me, the palace that he built. I hope you've seen the pictures of his own zoo. His son is a dentist, a billionaire. Now that's a lot of root canals. And the people of Ukraine were sick and tired of that. But most importantly, the people of Ukraine saw Yanukovych going towards Russia. Putin was putting all this pressure on him and using energy for him to join his so-called customs union. The people of Ukraine are European. They want, it's the music, it's the literature, it's the culture, it's the clothes. The Ukrainian people want to be part of Europe. And that's what these demonstrations were all about. And of course, then once Yanukovych left, Putin, and I predicted that he would not give up Sevastopol. And in order to keep Sevastopol, the naval base that gives him access to the Mediterranean, he's going to have to take Crimea. And I predicted that he would do it, and I'm sorry that I was right. But now, I don't know whether Putin, who still has sizable forces around eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine, whether he's going to take a step further and do what actually Hitler invented it. Send provocateurs in, there's unrest, there's fighting. You got to send your military in to restore order. Then you have a referendum like they just had in Ukraine, and 96% of the people vote the way you want them to. I don't know what he's going to do. And I think what he's going to do may be gauged by the price he has to pay in order, if he does take these actions. And by the way, there's a country called Moldova. A lot of us don't even know, couldn't pick it out on a map. Moldova was part of the Soviet Empire, the Soviet Union. And because of a strange set of circumstances, 1,500 Russian troops remained in a part of Moldova called Transnistria. And right now, that is the most vulnerable place because Moldova is not part of NATO. NATO has a thing called Clause 5, as you know, which an attack on one is attack on all, which should give some caution to Vladimir Putin, because right now he's fomenting unrest, particularly in Estonia, where over 30% of the population are Russian. So the next few days and weeks will be very crucial for many years to come as to what Vladimir Putin does and what our reaction is. Now, what do we need to do in Ukraine right now? I'd love to tell you that there's a military action that we can take. There's not. But that doesn't mean we give up on them. We didn't give up on the people of Czechoslovakia when they rose up. We didn't give up on the people of Hungary when they rose up. We didn't give up on what Ronald Reagan used to call the captive nations. And so I'm not giving up on Ukraine, but there's not a military option that is viable right now. And frankly, the American people would support it wouldn't support it even if there was. So what do we need to do? Well, the first thing that the Prime Minister 3 days ago told us, they need defensive weapons. They have only 6,000 people in their army that are viable militarily. And they need some defensive weapons, anti-tank, anti-air, and some light weapons. And then we need to have a long-term military assistance program. Some of my colleagues in the Senate said that would be provocative. What does that mean? He's just dismembered the country, for Christ's sake. And we're not going to and by the way, we have military assistance programs with about 20 nations that I could name to you right off the top of my head. So it's not that would be that outrageous. The second thing, and maybe the first thing, but right along with it, is helping them with their economy. Their economy is in a state of collapse, a total collapse, and the sooner we get some aid to them and an IMF agreement where they'll make the right kind of reforms and get their economy back on track. They are a rich country. They're an educated country. They're a cultured country. It's not that we're not talking about a country in another part of the world that doesn't have the talent that they have in Ukraine. Then we need to announce that we are restoring missile defense systems that Barack Obama canceled in the Czech Republic and Poland in his effort. I don't know why he did it, but we need to restore those. We need to have military exercises in the Baltics. We need to send some of our military over to Kiev and talk about what the Ukrainians need as far as their military capabilities are concerned for long term. There's several other things. We can put Georgia and Moldova on the path to NATO membership. Look, we're the richest, most powerful, most influential nation in the world, and we ought to be able to find ways to make sure that if Vladimir Putin intends to expand what he's already got on, that he will pay a very heavy price. They're wonderful people. Some of the most beautiful people in the world are Ukrainian, as you know, and they deserve a lot better than what they're getting now. Now I'd like to talk about Syria for just a second, and then I'll stop, and there's many other things going on in the world, including, by the way, I predict to you tonight, you'll see, within 6 months, there will be a major confrontation between Japan and China in the Asia-Pacific region over the Senkakus Island. But that is what it is. Now, and by the way, I would remind you that we won the Cold War and the end of the Soviet Union as it was without, as Margaret Thatcher said, Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot. And that was because of a simple phrase that he employed called peace through strength. And if you show strength and you show purposefulness, as Ronald Reagan did, then we can prevail without having to go into a conflict. And that's the message I'd like to leave you with tonight. We don't have to have another war, but we have to understand what Putin understands. In Syria, about 3 years ago, there were some young boys in Aleppo that were writing graffiti on the wall that was anti-Assad. Assad's people grabbed them, tortured them, killed a couple of them, and there was an uprising in Aleppo. And that uprising spread throughout Syria. And for quite a while, the momentum against Bashar Assad was in favor of the Free Syrian Army and those who were seeking to oust Bashar Assad. Then about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, there was a huge change, and that was that Syria convinced, and it was the Iranians that convinced 5,000 Hezbollah to come out of Lebanon and fight in this war. Hezbollah are tough, smart, well-trained fighters. We saw a dramatic increase in arms shipments from Moscow into Damascus. We saw the Iranian Revolutionary Guard taking hundreds of Syrians, training them, and sending them back into the fight in Syria. And tragically, we saw an influx of Islamists, of radical Islamists from all over the Arab world and all over the world. There are people who have come to Australia, from Australia, that are now fighting on the Islamic, radical Islamic Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and ISIS side in Syria. It is also now turned into a regional conflict. And that regional conflict is destabilizing its neighbors. My friends, today, Jordan has 20% of its population refugee. Think of the United States of America if we had 20% of our population refugee, the challenges that it would face. Lebanon is being destabilized. If you notice lately, it goes back and forth. Refugees have moved into Turkey in large numbers. Even in Kurdistan, a lot of the Kurdish, Syrian Kurds have moved in the Kurdish areas. Iraq and Syria are now avenues for Al-Qaeda moving back and forth. My friends, I won't go into all the history, but we could have saved Iraq if we'd have left a residual force there. In the Second Battle of Fallujah, the United States of America lost 96 Marines and soldiers killed, over 600 wounded. Today, the black flags of Al-Qaeda fly over the city of Fallujah. You know, I meet a lot of the families of those who were killed and wounded, and it's hard for me to explain to them exactly what we've done in order to justify the sacrifice, particularly the mothers of their sons that sacrificed there. So it is now turned into a regional conflict. And a seminal moment, historians will look back at a seminal moment in this whole period of when Barack Obama said, if chemical weapons are used, it will cross a red line and we will have to act. There was chemical weapons used in large numbers, 1,400 men, women, and children died, and Barack Obama said, I am going to attack Syria and respond to this because they crossed a red line. But Lindsey Graham and I went to the White House and had a meeting with him, and he said, I'm going to strike. Lindsey Graham and I went out in the driveway there by the White House and said, we're with the president all the way. A few days later, the president decided that he would not, that he would go to Congress to get their permission. My friends, that sent a signal everywhere in the world. And that signal was that the United States of America does not back up what it says it's going to do. And that has affected every situation and every part of the world. So, as I said, I still believe, and in Syria, it's more and more of these radical Islamists are flowing in, more and more fighting between the Free Syrian Army guys and the ISIS, who are very extreme. And right now, more and more the momentum is with Bashar Assad. And so John Kerry and the president called for a meeting in Geneva, which is supposed to arrange for the transition of Bashar Assad from power. Nobody in their right mind believes that when Bashar Assad is winning, that he's going to arrange his departure from power. It was all delusional. So, and by the way, our Israeli friends are very nervous about what our commitment is and all about these negotiations with Iran. And we have now an Egypt that's falling under a Mubarak-style rule. We have a Libya that is in chaos. We have a very bleak picture across the entire Middle East with a rise of Al-Qaeda. The United States still has the best military. We have the best intelligence. We have the best trained men and women. We can get the job done. We just need to give them the commitment. And finally, we've got to stop cutting defense. The day that we decided, we sent over a message to the Senate that they were going to cut defense dramatically for next year, the same day the Chinese announced a 12.2 increase in their defense spending. We've got to maintain some balance, and we've seen this movie before, that we have cut defense because there's not going to be any more wars and we find ourselves in conflicts. The President of the United States said Vladimir Putin doesn't realize he's in the 21st century. No, he doesn't. And he doesn't, the Cold War isn't the Cold War because the Cold War was also an ideological struggle. But Vladimir Putin believes that this is still a situation where he needs to restore his dreams of grandeur of the days of old. So I believe that we need to have more Americans involved and engaged. We need to spend more time with members of Congress and the Senate who are interested in these issues. I spend a lot of my time bringing a lot of young, newer members of the Senate, both Democrat and Republican, with me, traveling around the world. And I do spend a lot of time talking to the young men and women who volunteer their services in the United States military. And they're still the very best. So I thank you for being with me tonight. I've probably talked too long. I'd like to respond to any questions or comments or insults that you might have. Thank you very much.
Senator, thank you very much. We have 2 microphones in the hall. If you can put your hands up, there's one there, and the other one is there, and we'll try and get to as many of you as we can. Why don't you go first? I can see there's one right there.
Let us assume, Senator, that 2008 had been reversed and you were now in your second term as President of the United States. Let us go back 1 month in the Ukraine and in the Crimea, and would you please tell us specifically what you would have done to avoid what has happened in Crimea and what you claim is likely to happen in the Ukraine over the next weeks and months?
Could I just say that I don't ever try to go through the mental exercise or if I had been president, because it's not healthy for me, and it's just kind of, a waste of time. I respect the verdict of the people of the United States in a free and fair election. By the way, I had a beloved friend named Morris Udall who once ran for president from primary against Jimmy Carter. He was a Democrat from Arizona and a very funny man. And he lost about 5 primaries in a row to Jimmy Carter. He came in second in each one of them. Finally, he lost in Wisconsin, and that was really the end. And it was really sad because the night before they had declared him the winner, and with the absentee ballots, he was a loser. So that ended. And he got to the press conference the next day, and he said, "The people have spoken, the bastards." So the people have spoken. But it's not what I would have done in the last few days. It's what I would have done for the last 5 years. Because I would have had a situation where Vladimir Putin would have understood that for him to act in a reckless fashion, that there would be significant penalties for doing so. In other words, when when it was clear that Yanukovych was as corrupt as he was, and they started these demonstrations, I would have weighed in as Ronald Reagan used to, as he did in the case of Nathan Sharansky and many others. I would have weighed in heavily on their side, and I would have made it clear to Vladimir Putin that if he did interfere with what was going on, then there would have been a very heavy penalty to pay. For example, I would have sent already some weapons to the government of Ukraine and people so that I'm not saying they could beat Vladimir Putin, but the price that Vladimir Putin would have to pay would have been much higher. But it would have been way back for example, I would have made moves to bring Ukraine into NATO and would have tried to see that that process took place. So that's pretty much not a very good answer, but my best one. Thank you.
I'd like to go back to your comments about getting Georgia and Moldavia into NATO as a way of standing up to Putin. Say we did that. You mentioned that the treaty requires that we go to war to defend a NATO country that is attacked. Well, say Putin decides, as he did in the Crimea, to test us and attacks Moldavia. Would America actually honor NATO's agreement to defend Moldavia? And if we did not, would that not be the end of the NATO alliance as we know it?
In this case of Moldova, I believe that that there's one thing to basically absorb Moldova, which is a very small country, but to take on Moldova is a great risk for Vladimir Putin, since he is taking on the entire NATO establishment. So it seems to me we have two choices. We either sacrifice Moldova and say we're not going to defend it, or we are going to be steadfast and say don't do this because there are serious consequences. I'm a student of history. Hitler marched into the Sudetenland on behalf of German-speaking people, had a referendum, and it was 96% people wanted to join the Third Reich. And then they went to Czechoslovakia, and then they went to Austria, and then to Czechoslovakia. And Neville Chamberlain said, we're not going to send our young people to a country where they don't speak our language and we don't know them. And we had peace in our time. The only thing that tyrants understand is a penalty to be paid for aggression. And I think there's no greater proof of that than Ronald Reagan. Some of us here are old enough to remember when Ronald Reagan said, take down this wall. My friends on the left said, oh, don't say that. You're going to alienate the Russians. When we strengthened NATO and we started sending our troops in a much stronger numbers into Europe, don't do that. You're going to provoke the Russians. We even had one of the guys in Time magazine, writing Time magazine, we don't want Germany reunited because it will alienate and provoke the Russians. This is the same thing now. My colleagues in the Senate say, don't send weapons to the Ukraine because it will provoke Russia. So you've got really two choices: doing nothing and watching these people picked off one by one, or convincing Vladimir Putin or any bully that the cost of doing these things, which is in violation of all international law and of treaties. In 1994, Ukraine got rid of their nuclear arsenal in return for a guarantee of their territorial integrity, including Crimea. And the Russians were signatories to that. So are we saying it's not worth the paper it's written on? And if it isn't worth the paper it's written on, then what about all the other paper? So there's no good options in these things. But I think history shows that if you cave in to aggressors, then it only encourages further aggression. But thank you for the question. It's an excellent one.
Senator McCain, I'm over here. It's a pleasure to hear your thoughts this evening, Senator. Thank you so much. I'm of Ukrainian descent, and I appreciate your knowledge of Ukrainian history. In fact, the word Russia and Russian come from Ukrainian words. When they went north, the motherland called them the scattered, Rossiani. And so there is quite a long link. I had a question for you about the trilateral agreement in 1994. As you mentioned, at that time, the Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and they gave it up for the guarantee of America and Britain to keep sovereign the Ukrainian borders. What is American compliance and British compliance to that accord?
Well, obviously we are not honoring it, and then you have to ask the question, suppose that Ukraine had decided not to give up that nuclear arsenal and Vladimir Putin invades. I think he might have been facing a more severe challenge of a nuclear-armed Ukraine than one with a 6,000-person army. And I'd like to mention one other thing, and that is, obviously, nuclear proliferation is a huge issue and will always remain so. But what is the lesson to other countries that have nuclear power and nuclear inventories? Should they give up their nuclear capabilities? In fact, because of our failure in Syria, and there are now countries in the Middle East that are trying to acquire nuclear weapons as well.
I called your office several times this week along with about 20 other senators. I am extremely concerned because you made a comment that we are not able or will not go in militarily to fight or to put our troops or our planes or our ships in the area. I am also of Ukrainian descent, and I am absolutely disgusted because I think the senators, the congresspeople,
Please keep it to a question, ma'am.
do not understand what is going on, and he is a absolute
Please
copy
keep
of
it to a
Hitler.
question. We're here all night.
So my question is, why can you not go in there militarily and do something?
I would like to just say to you, I sympathize with your emotions and the feeling you have for the people of Crimea and Ukraine. But there is not a military option that is viable that we could carry out. That does not mean that we give up on Ukraine and stand for them. When the Russian tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia, we couldn't do anything militarily, but we stood up for the Czech people, and over time, thanks to Voice of America, thanks to our efforts, thanks to our military buildup, thanks to so much winning the ideological struggle and their economy, we were able to free the Czech people, and they went through a terrible time. But when there is a situation as it is where we cannot, there's not a practical way, frankly, that we could get troops over there and get them in the middle of a fight. And I also have to tell you, very frankly, the American people, for better or for worse, would not support a military intervention in Ukraine today. That's just what it is. And the American people have to support any time that we send young Americans into harm's way. But I will never give up. I will never give up. As long as I live, I will fight for Ukrainian freedom and independence. And as I said, someday, probably in my view, in the next 10 to 20 years, the Russian gas station will collapse. And then the people of Ukraine will be free. And I understand your frustration and your anger.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for being here. My name is Barak Raviv. I'm an Israeli American, and I want to thank you for all your support. One of my biggest concerns is what's going on with Iran. I've been following the nuclear development for the last few years, and there's a big concern about what steps we could take beyond the sanctions. I know we've recently increased the pressure on the sanctions, but when push comes to shove, everybody talks about different levels of uranium enrichment. Where do you think the United States stands, and how far do you think it'll go to prevent nuclear Iran?
I think that the sanctions that we put on Iran, by the way, over the objections of the administration, have had an effect on the Iranians. I think it's brought them to the table. And I am willing to give this process of negotiation 6 months or sometime longer if necessary. But I think there are several fundamentals that we have to understand. One is that they have to give up the right to enrich. We will guarantee them enough nuclear capabilities to build nuclear power plants to as many as they want. If they don't give up the right to enrich their nuclear material, which is simply enough to build a nuclear weapon, then it's not acceptable. They have a long history of evasion, of lying and cheating. In fact, Rouhani, their prime minister now, bragged to the media about how he deceived us when he was a negotiator last time. The second thing is that bothers me about this administration, both in Syria and with Iran. In case I'm sure you noticed that the Israelis had to take out a very large arms cache coming from Iran that was going to Hezbollah. Recently, there was a huge cache of weapons that were being brought to Yemen that was intercepted. They're doing bad things around the world. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard in Syria doing all the bad things that they're doing. They even had a plot, my friends, to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in a restaurant in Washington, D.C. It's a lousy restaurant, by the way. And so they are still carrying out these non-nuclear activities that are destabilizing throughout the Middle East. I could go down a long list with you, Bahrain, many other places. So I guess we have to go back to Ronald Reagan's slogan about trust but verify. Only I would say don't trust but verify. But at the same time, we need to give these negotiations at least an opportunity to see if they succeed. I'm very pessimistic whether they will succeed or not, but for us to give it no chance, I think it would not be an appropriate action, particularly given what's at stake.
We have time for just two more questions. One in the back here and one over here.
Senator McCain, I've been a Republican since I was 6, since Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. I have a question for you on a broad topic. Does the Republican Party have a strategy for the younger people in my age demographic that socialism does not work and that we do need military strength? It just seems that the Republican Party is a little bit all over the place, and if the people of my generation don't understand what's going on, then we are really kind of doomed for the future.
I think that the Republican Party has got to learn to communicate with young people, and the Republican Party has to understand what the hopes and dreams and aspirations of young people are. And you've got to give the Obama campaign great credit. They did a tremendous job with social networking, a fantastic job. I'm sure that you know lots of young people that were literally in constant contact with the Obama campaign. And what did our young people get from the Romney campaign? A robocall. And I'm not making that up. And so we're going to have to do that, and we need to get the feedback from the young people as well. You can only do that through taking advantage of all the social networking that is there. And there's one more issue I want to raise with you, and I hope that all of my friends here who are Republicans would really devote a lot of their efforts in trying to convince our Republican members of Congress to take up and pass comprehensive immigration reform. I say that first of all for the good of the country. This is not a nation that can forever have 11 million people living in the shadows. We cannot have 11 million people deprived of the rights of our citizens. And yes, they came here illegally, and our proposal has stiff fines, 10 years. It's tough. It's not amnesty. This was developed by 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats in the United States Senate. So first of all, for the country. Second of all, for the Republican Party. My friends, look at the demographics in California, in Arizona, across this country. Last year in Texas, for the first time in Texas history, the majority of high school graduates were, quote, non-white. Okay, you can do the demographics. And anybody that believes that it is any different with Hispanics than it was with the Irish or the Italians or the Poles or the Jews or any other wave of immigrants that came to this country, they want recognition. They want recognition. They want their place. And they want to have a chance to become citizens of this country. So if we don't, Republicans, get this done, we're going to go the way of the Whigs. And I want us to... And I don't want that to happen, because I'm proud of the Republican Party. I'm proud of the principles and values that we hold. I'm proud to be a party of Teddy Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan and Abraham Lincoln. But we're going to have to address this issue, And unfortunately, many of our friends in the House, who I am very respectful of, haven't gotten that message because they're in, thanks to redistricting, they're in lifetime seats. And that's unfortunate. Can we do one more?
One more, yes.
Or two?
You want to take two?
Yeah, sure.
Two is good.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for coming in 2008 as well, and giving a fantastic foreign policy speech. I just wanted to ask if it was, if you would agree it's true that the future Ukraine, and in fact, is rooted in what Europe and the European Union has done and miscalculated. 50% of Russia's exports are to Europe, and 2% are to the United States. We have less to influence than the Europeans do. And the sanctions, if they're going to work, have to really start in Germany and in the rest of Europe. What would you agree or disagree about that statement that really the power of sanctions has to come from Europe?
I think that our sanctions can have a great effect just because of our economic influence throughout the world. But I agree with you. It'll be very interesting to see what the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany does. They are dependent on Russian energy, and I'm very much afraid that we may not see the kind of action that we had hoped for, some of it, again, because of their dependence. Could I just mention one quick story to you about immigration? Every year since 2001, Lindsey Graham and Joe Lieberman have gone to either Kabul or Baghdad for 4th of July to be with the troops. Since 2007, 4th of July, Lindsey Graham and I and Joe were there, and David Petraeus invited us to go to a re-enlistment ceremony where 280 members of the military were re-enlisting to stay and fight in Iraq. Also, there were some 83 green card holders who were being given their citizenship on 4th of July. We have a law that if you join our military and you are a green card holder, you have an accelerated path to citizenship. So, and David Petraeus was in the palace, old palace of Saddam Hussein. So there was probably 2,000 people there, and they were down in front, and I was up on the stage, and with General Petraeus, he asked me to speak, and I looked down in the front row, and there was 3 empty seats with boots on them. Each seat had a pair of boots on them. And I said, what is that? He said, oh, those 3 were killed in the last 48 hours, and we're going to give them their citizenship posthumously. That really came, brought to my mind, and I'm sure to yours, how precious citizenship is. And if people are willing to fight for it and to serve their country for it, then maybe we ought to give them at least a chance to achieve it. Yeah.
Hi, Senator. Senator, I respectfully, I don't trust the Senate. I don't trust, like many people, the Congress. When I hear somebody say we want to give immigration reform, I don't trust that they're going to do what they're going to do. They say they're going to close the border. They say they're going to do so many things, but who can trust them? They don't do anything. There's no follow-through whatsoever. And I'm sure you know better than I what happened to Ronald Reagan. He signed into, he legalized, 2.6 million that came in, that there's a multiplier effect. You give legal citizenship to 2 million, that becomes 10. They invite their families, their relatives. So if we let 11 million people here that turn into 60, and there's no border patrol or anything like that, how can the American people trust, when you say that this is a good thing, how can we trust that it's a good thing?
Thank you for the question. First of all, Ronald Reagan wasn't perfect, but when we gave amnesty to 3 million people back in the 80s, there was the commitment to enforce our border and to take the necessary measures. Well, first of all, the Congress never appropriated the funds to do that, and it is an object lesson. This proposal that we have in the bill, people who are on this path, and it's 10 years before they get a green card, have to pay fees, and those fees are used for our border security and the E-Verify. There are two aspects of immigration reform that have to happen. One is a program we call E-Verify, which means that every person who is here has to have a card that is tamper-proof, that when they go for a job, the employer looks at that card, and without that card, if the employer hires that person without it, then that employer will face penalties and and criminal penalties for hiring someone illegally. Well, if we have that system, then people who are here illegally aren't going to be able to get a job, and people who want to come here illegally are going to know that they can't get a job. Second is border security. There is in this bill as many as 20,000 additional border patrol. It's paid for not by future Congresses, but by the fees imposed on those who are on the path to citizenship. In Iraq especially, but also in Afghanistan, we developed technology where we can surveil and secure our border. And there's many friends of mine here who have been to Israel and seen that Israel, through the use of surveillance, is able to have a secure border. If the Israelis are able to do it, then we are able to do it. A provision in this bill requires 90% effective control of the border. And let me just mention one other little factoid that I learned just recently. In the most southern part of Texas is now a very big transshipment point. 82% of the people that are crossing the border today in southern Texas are not Mexican. They are from other countries in the world. So we're talking about national security here of people who are coming from all over the world, and not only just to get a job. So all I can tell you is the money will be there, the technology is there, the requirements will be there, the E-Verify are being there, and the other option is to have the status quo, and I don't think there's enough buses to deport people back down across the border. There just aren't. And by the way, there are children here who came here, brought by their parents, that in my view, deserve a chance to become citizens as well. Could I thank you for your patience? I thank you for your commitment. I thank you